The Meta TR V4.2 Essential is the latest trail bike from Commencal. The Enduron brand redesigned their Meta frame set for 2017 and it comes in two travel options. You've got the 130mm TR version and the 160mm AM version has been tested in MBUK's Enduro Bike of the Year test. The V4.2 replaces the older Meta V4, which had been around for a couple of years. The V4.2 is a little bit lighter, the angle is a little bit more up to date, a little bit longer, the usual sort of thing that we're coming to see in 2017 from a lot of bike brands. The biggest change perhaps is the use of the metric shock standard. The longer shocks have slightly better sensitivity and are being offered by the likes of RockShox and Fox, and on this particular model we've got a RockShox Deluxe shock in there. As we saw with the V4, the shock is nestled neatly into the top tube. And this year the new mounts are a little bit smoother, a little bit tidier, and brings the weight down a little bit on these bikes. The Meta has always done well in Trail Bike of the Year. In previous years we've tested the longer travel 160mm version, and it's a bike that despite pedalling pretty well to the top of the hill, with 160mm of travel is a real hoot down the hill. The guy behind Commencal Bikes, Max Commencal, always wants to have bikes that suit his kind of riding. They're based out in Andorra, which is a mountainous region between Spain and France. And the riding here is steep, it's loose, it's jagged, it's rocky, and so the bikes that they build tend to suit this environment really well. While the 160mm bikes obviously excel in this terrain, it's great to see that the 130mm version here also does very well when the trail points down. Commencal are one of the few brands this year using the metric shock standard, and we have a RockShox Deluxe RT shock at the back. This is matched up front by 140mm of travel from a Pike RC, so it's not the full top-end RCT3, but it is still a decent fork. SRAM provide a lot of the other bits and pieces on the bike as well. There's the level TL brakes, which are pretty competent there. There's a RockShox Reverb Stealth dropper post, as we almost expect these days. And there's also an NX/GX group set on there, providing 11 gears. Along with a few updates to the geometry for this year, you also get boost spacing front and back. The wheels are a set of Formula hubs built into a pair of Mavic 424 rims. Commencal have clearly put a lot of thought into the tyre choice for the Meta this year. Up front there's a Maxxis Minion DHR in a 2.3-inch variety, and at the back there's a Maxxis Ardent in 2.25, so plenty of volume there, and clearly they have been sort of looking at the different tread patterns to make sure they get the best out of both of them. Perhaps interestingly, they haven't gone super wide on the rim front, with the Mavic 424 rim only having a 24mm internal width. It's not too bad, but it's just not as wide as we've come to see on a number of the other bikes in Trail Bike of the Year. Finishing off the build of the Meta for our test this year is a load of Ride Alpha kit. This is their in-house brand, and it's all pretty good to be fair.
Commencal's Meta AM V4 was our winning Trail Bike of the Year 2 years ago, but this year it's the Meta TR that we're dealing with. It's essentially an extremely similar bike, and it's actually got more similar this year than it has in previous years. That's because the travel has gone up at the rear, and it's also gained a 148mm boost back end, and the shock has also not just increased in travel, it's now the latest form of metric size shock. So they're getting extra stroke out of there, which is where that extra 10mm of travel comes from. Apart from the boost back end, frame layout is very similar. It uses the same slightly offset linkage to drive that new metric shock, and that front end of that shock is still buried in the very distinctive, slightly kinked but extremely broad half top tube arrangement. It's a love-hate look, but you can't deny it puts stiffness exactly where you need it and ensures everything lines up with the right shock path. With the big bar up front, with Commencal's own short stem, it's on point. It's been stretched as well, and it's slightly slacker than it was previously. It feels like a much bigger bike than it actually is as soon as you hit the trails. It's just got that planted, sure-footed, confident feel that really swaggers down the trail. You know, it's not going to take any rubbish from anyone. Whether it's rocks, roots, berms, drops, it just loves attacking them. It's certainly not a bike that will put you on the defensive. While it's not a radical linkage setup, it operates the shock extremely well. There's very little bob under power, and so the traction is very, very good. Even though it's not a bike you might not initially choose as a climber because it's relatively heavy, it actually drives and grips really, really well, so it offsets a lot of that weight on the trail in practical terms. If you're really pushing hard or you weigh a bit more than normal, you might want to add some progression into the shock with some bottomless rings. But, you know, again, it's a simple procedure and you'll have a shock that sits slightly higher in the travel. The bottom line is, Commencal's just an absolute charger. It loves being grabbed those big bars and just thrown at every challenge and obstacle on the trail, just turning it into an advantage, turning it into a thrill. You know, we deliberately went down on travel in terms of this year's Trail Bike of the Year test, and the Commencal's the kind of bike that proves that wasn't a mistake. This rides as hard as a lot of bigger travel bikes, but with an agility and a responsiveness and a fun factor that's missing from a lot of those. It's an absolute ripper.
We've always got on well with the Meta bikes in Trail Bike of the Year and other tests in What Mountain Bike, and this year they've kind of excelled themselves a little bit. Max Commencal and his guys in Andorra have done a great job of speccing both the frame and the kit that goes onto the bike. That's partly thanks to their direct sales model, so you do have to buy it from them direct from Andorra, but it does mean that the price is good, even though you are paying in euros, so watch that exchange rate. So, as Guy said, it's an absolute ripper on big, steep, difficult, loose terrain, and it's a bike that we really enjoyed riding and therefore definitely deserves its place high up in this year's test.